Hello there, classmates. I thought this might be an easier way to do my presentation than trying to do all of it live. What I'd like to talk to you today about is a guerrilla marketing campaign that came to my attention the beginning of December, end of November, when I was actually driving to work and listening to NPR. The thing that I found most interesting is that it is a product of environmental activism, but it's also tied to issues of national security, corporate and political involvement, brand appropriation, parody, sarcasm, and really a sense of accountability for both the nation that it was hosted in, Europe in general, as well as a global community. But first, let's put this conversation in context.
On November 13th, 2015, a series of terrorist attacks occurred in Paris and its surrounding suburbs. For a short time after the attack, there was a lot of confusion and a lot of worry from the French people and from those who were planning to attend the COP21 conference because they weren't sure the state of security or the state of the city itself. As a result of the attacks, French authorities made a statement that public protests and public gatherings would be prohibited throughout the course of the conference. To add to this, a number of environmental activists and other protesters known to the French government were placed under house arrest during the duration of the conference, with up to 24 individuals were also arrested before a crime was committed. Authorities did choose to hold the conference, but the only members who would be able to attend were official delegates, sponsoring organizations, representatives of non-government organizations, and associated members that had helped plan and helped run the conference. Naturally, this did not go over well with the populace. They felt that the government and the corporations that sponsored the conference were aligning their interests, and the state of emergency was designed to reduce the impact protesters may have upon conference programming and to keep the debate and the conversation much more focused on the agenda set forth within the official program.
Now I'd like you to pay attention to our next speaker. Think about the context for which these words are spoken. Taken in a different context, many of the same words and phrases can be applied to those who have been protesting and working for environmental action and for climate change results. Just take a look, see what you think.
We have come to Paris to show our resolve. And we salute the people of Paris for insisting this crucial conference go on. An act of defiance that proves nothing will deter us from building the future we want for our children. What greater rejection of those who would tear down our world than marshaling our best efforts to save it? Nearly 200 nations have assembled here this week. A declaration that for all the challenges we face, the growing threat of climate change could define the contours of this century more dramatically than any other.
Now I like to think the activists and the people working against climate change have the same attitudes towards the planet that many politicians seem to espouse towards terrorism, commerce, equality, for whatever that means. And they take the actions knowing that there are consequences, and they take the actions knowing that it's difficult. But it's very different expectation towards someone who's seen as being disruptive and someone who's seen as productive and working for change. So the next clip was released on Brandalism's social media channels. It goes through the process and how they conducted their campaign and posted their artwork, and how it seemed to slip under the radar a bit until after the posters were in place. It gives you a bit of background info, and once you see some of the images I'll discuss in a later clip, it'll give you some idea for how these are placed around Paris and how the campaign was designed and implemented.
Brandalism claimed that over 600 posters were hung throughout Paris during their COP21 campaign. I selected 16 images that I believe encompass several distinct themes: climate change and environmental awareness, citizen calls to action, corporate criticism, and government and political official criticism. I'll briefly go through each of the posters I selected and analyze the composition and rhetorical approach for each individual image. Figure 1 shows a subject in a black and white photograph. It's a middle-aged white male in a vest and tie. He's smiling and smoking a cigar. He's holding an inflatable model of the Earth. This poster includes the logo of Solution COP21 Paris. The text says, "Same bullshit, different conference." I think this speaks to previous conferences that were publicized in an attempt to effect change but were not legally binding. A specific example is the Kyoto Conference, which was the first legally binding conference, but Canada and the US, among other nations, have since backed out. Image 2 shows us Alice from Disney's Alice in Wonderland. She's got a mask over her face and a hose that leads to an orange container with a yellow poison sign. This is a general pollution image, possible references to Disney and other large corporations, but specifically it doesn't mention anything that it expects users to do or to recognize. The next image is the Bronze Age, 3200 BC to 600 BC, the Oil Age, 1859 to 2015. This is very simple, but it displays a belief that the time for oil is a driving force of innovation and cultural impact is nearing an end. Figure 4 shows us an image of a landfill reflected across its vertical center. There's text in both English and French. The English reads, "Everything must go somewhere." It's reminding viewers that every item that they use, that they consume and discard, must end up somewhere, oftentimes landfill. The next poster shows us a white woman in a bathing suit leaning against a rock, one hand draped across the top of her wet hair. She stands in a shallow pool of dirty water, a blue hose near her bare feet, and a black woman bends down in ankle-deep water, scooping into a container. The text reads, "1 in 10 people in the world lack access to safe water." This shows a real disconnect between how certain cultures value water and other natural resources. It also points out the difficulties of daily life that some people experience that we may never even consider. Our next poster shows almost a cartoon-style, comic-style image of a woman holding her face and she's screaming. The text reads, "Climate change, it stings." This reflects both on the difficulties and discomfort we face as we prepare to adapt to an adjusting environment, as well as the steps we'll have to take to make sure the efforts happen in time to make an impact. And the poster's telling us it's not going to be easy. This next image references Volkswagen. It's displayed with the following text. "We're sorry that we got caught. Now that we've been caught, we're trying to make you think we care about the environment, but we're not the only ones." Now, you'll also see a couple hashtags here. Red lines and climate change are two of them. They reference both red line as something a line that must not be crossed, a line in the sand, something that cannot be exceeded if we are to survive. Climate Games draws users to a website where they are encouraged to document and to share acts of environmental activism. Figure 8 shows us an image of an offshore oil rig among the waves. The mobile logo is displayed in the bottom right. The text reads, "We knew about the impact of fossil fuels, but publicly denied it." And again, we see these hashtags. This references a popular belief that many companies had existing research about climate change and global warming, but they're only now acting upon that research and acknowledging that it exists because public awareness has been growing. The next poster shows us an image of a silver crown above an iPhone. The phone's screen itself is cracked and a trail of blood drips down from the top corner. The text reads, "The king is dead, designed to be obsolete within 2 years." This shows a real criticism of disposable consumer culture, where technology is made intentionally fragile and replaceable. The problem is that we have many heavy metals and other toxic substances that compose these devices. So not only is it a consumer cost, it makes a real environmental impact when these are thrown away or discarded. Our next poster shows a white picture frame with smoke rising from the top. Within that frame, we see a factory. It says, "Dear Louvre Museum, when Total and Any sponsor you, you sponsor Total and Any. Don't sponsor climate chaos. Big oil out of culture." Now, this is a reference to Any's refining, marketing, and chemicals, and Total Refining and Chemicals. We can think of them as equivalent to a petroleum refining company. By calling attention to the corporate sponsors of a national landmark, such as the Louvre, the artists are casting doubt on the morality and ethics of those who accept such funds. This is particularly powerful for all of the visitors who are going to be stopping by the location. It might not affect Parisians as much, but visitors are definitely going to call attention to that. We see a woman wearing an Air France hat and a flight attendant uniform. She's holding a finger to her lips in a shh gesture. The text reads, "Tackling climate change? Of course not. We're an airline. We're sponsoring the UN climate conference so we look like we're part of the solution and to make sure our profits aren't affected. Economic growth is far more important than saving the planet. So we'll keep bribing politicians and emitting greenhouse gases. Just keep it to yourself. Air France, part of the problem." Now, this shows that some industries and companies are held to a different standard, but it also calls attention to bribery and possible troublesome political connections that we have between corporations and governments and why certain industries receive kickbacks or special permissions when others do not. This says states, diplomats, industries, bankers. For climate, as well as the rest, they are not the solution but the problem. Make together a world without them. Paris, 28 November to 12 December. This shows that business leaders and environmental and government officials will not themselves cause or support change. Change has to come from the people and from the governments those people rely on and represent. The next image we see British Prime Minister David Cameron. He's holding a helmet and wearing a hat, and he's got sponsorships all over his uniform, including British Gas, Shell, BP, and Sun. This is an implication that politicians are sponsored by corporations through lobbying and campaign donations, and possibly through bribes. The next image shows President Barack Obama smiling and swimming with his daughters. In the background, a fire burns in the water and a plume of thick black smoke rises into the air. I'm not quite sure whether this is implying that Obama and other politicians don't treat climate change seriously, or the fact that no matter who you are, climate change is going to affect you as much as anyone else. There's no escaping this. The next image shows the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe tilting his head down and frowning solemnly. A number of nuclear reactors actually coming from his scalp, plumes of steam rising up into the air, and this does include the logo of solution COP21 Paris. Now, many Asian cultures actually bow as a sign of respect or as part of an apology. This photo is likely drawing inferences to the Fukushima nuclear plant disaster and the subsequent difficulties to that industry and the popular belief that nuclear energy is not good for the planet. This last poster actually is letterhead from 10 Downing Street, residence of the Prime Minister of Great Britain. The majority of text has been redacted or censored, but what is visible reads, "Dear George, I hate poor people. Thanks, David." Now, selective editing can be done both by government officials to keep information from the public, as well as members of the public to discern whatever meaning they'd like from text. So the implications here are that we should read between the lines of government censorship and government action to see what's really happening, to see what's best for our community.
So it's difficult to assess how successful this campaign has been. Obviously, when you're not advertising and paying for media space on television or on the radio or on social media sites or on through Google, billboards, that sort of thing, there's not a metric to track a viral campaign and see how successful it was. But I can imagine that Brandalism, through their use of social activism, through their rhetorical devices that they were able to use throughout all of their posters, produced some pretty compelling content that cost them very, very little money for a very large impact, particularly when the French government and the United Nations Conference of Parties for the Sustainability and Innovation Forum restricted protests and public gatherings. So in that sense, I think that the campaign was very well received, and I found it extremely compelling, especially the viral nature and the sort of do-it-yourself activism that these artists represented.